also take measurements of only the bill, particularly in shorebirds, measure the wing length, the tail length, and we weigh the birds and look for any special features. We look at the age of the birds, breeding activity. We can look at territory size and migration routes and the use of habitat. So on the left here, we have a picture of an eastern curlew up in Brisbane that's having a transmitter attached to it so they can follow where that bird's migrating to. On the right is a silver eye that we caught recently on Broughton Island. This is a very, very young bird that's only recently fledged. You can see by the forehead that it's still growing its feathers in. And it's got quite a yellow gape. And the local subspecies that we get around the area all of the time, Cornwall eye. So we can learn lots of things, and some of the things that we've learned about Australian birds is that most of our small bush birds don't move far from where they're born. Silver eyes can fly up to over 2,000 kilometres from Tasmania and Victoria during the winter, come up here so that they're not quite as cold as they would be down there. But in Europe, small birds, they only live for 5 to 7 years, but Australian birds of a similar size, they can live for up to 15 years. There's a big difference in lifespan because we've got a much milder climate. And there's just an example there from the ABBS website of the average lifespan of some of the Australian birds and what the oldest known bird is of that species, how long it's lived. And those records come from banding records. So in the hunter, banding's been going on since at least the 1970s and it's ongoing. There's been a number of past and current banders that have been club members, including Anne, Fred Van Gessel, Joy Nichols, Rob Kite, Greg and I, Emily Mowat, Millie Formby, Tom Clark, and I'm sure there's lots of others that I don't know about. Yeah. There's been banding of bush birds and shorebirds in the local area. Not so much seabirds. There are some island seabirds, birds that nest on the islands like the Gould's petrels and some of the shearwaters that have banded on Broughton Island, but for the most part we don't do much with seabirds in the hunter. Most of the birds are caught via mist netting, although in the past cannon netting was used, but at the moment it's mist netting only, unless you're catching shearwaters when you have to stick your hand down a burrow to catch them. Some birds that we've caught in the local area, Blue Gum Hills and at Sugarloaf with Rob Kite. So to become a bander, you have to be licensed. So you have to get an authority from the ABBS, which is the Australian Bird and Bat Banding Scheme. And initially, people start off with a C-class licence usually, which is basically a learner's permit. And to be able to become an A-class holder, you have to band at least 500 to 700 birds of a variety of species and be competent in identification, handling the birds safely, recording data and setting up and taking down equipment. So an A-class licence, which is the full licence in Australia, most people only have a MISNET endorsement, and there's very few in the whole of Australia, a handful, maybe 1 or 2 dozen that have a cannon netting endorsement. So that's a very specialised field. Other countries' licensing systems are a little bit different, but ultimately people train before they can get a full licence. Our class licence is used often by researchers, and that's a restricted licence. So university students with a specific research project, and they've only got limited species that they're able to band. So if they catch anything else, they have to release it unbanded. In addition to that, there's a scientific licence issued by national parks. And for things like attaching transmitters to birds, you have to get approval from the ethics committee. And also you need permission from landowners to undertake banding activities, whether that's national parks or private landholders. So on Broughton Island, we get all 3 subspecies of silverise. So you can see there's a photo here of all 3 subspecies caught on the same day around the same time just recently in the winter. So the local species on the left, the Tasmanian species in the middle, and the Victorian westernensis species on the right. On the right-hand photo is a picture of a greater sand plover. That was taken in Broome in February. He was in partial breeding plumage, getting ready to migrate back to the north to breed. So there's lots of things that we have to look at when we're banding, and the most important is the safety and welfare and well-being of the birds. We don't band if it's windy because it affects the nets, or if it's rainy. The heat or the cold don't matter as much. You just have to watch out for how the birds are travelling in those conditions. But if it's windy, you can cause damage to the nets, and the birds can see the nets, so there's little point in trying to band in those conditions. And we hold birds for the shortest time that we need to process them and release them, usually back near where we catch them, particularly bush birds. We put them in a small calico bag, we weigh them and take photos, take their measurements, and then release them. We keep them in the shade. If it's particularly hot and the birds are becoming a little bit stressed, we'll often offer them some water or sugar water just to get them on their way again. But most of the time that's not required. With shorebirds, they can be caught using mist nets or cannon nets. The most common practice these days is cannon nets, and that's the most considered to be the safest method. But mist nets are also used. It depends on what you're targeting and your situation. Mist netting is done at night because otherwise the birds see the nets and they just won't fly into them. But the catches are smaller, whereas cannon netting is undertaken during the day and you can get larger numbers of birds in one go. And when that happens, the birds are kept in holding pens for a limited period of time, and if that time has elapsed and the birds haven't been processed, they've got to be released. You can't just hold them until they're all processed. In both mist netting and cannon netting, mortality and injury rates are very low. In fact, since we've started mist netting in late 2014, we've only lost 1 bird, and that was due to predation by a kookaburra. So once you get a kookaburra, you close the net, because once they know it's there, they'll come back again. So the safest thing to do is close that particular net so that you don't capture any more birds on that day. Similarly with cannon netting, the mortality and injury rates are low. When we're in Broome in February, we caught over 2,000 birds over a 3-week period, and there was 1 mortality, and that was after the bird was released. Unfortunately, there was a raptor hanging around and the bird didn't get away quick enough. We had 1 bird that suffered stress after it was released, which was recaptured the following day, and it was nursed back to health and released successfully. So those numbers are extremely low, and all mortality rates have to be reported. So we set up a banding station. So we have a table, we put signs out to notify the public if we're in a public area that we're banding. We get all the equipment ready, and that's the type of things that we have laid out. We have special pliers, we have scales to weigh the birds, rulers and calipers for measurements, and notebooks for recording what's in the area, and we have a handbook, The Bird in the Hand, which is produced by the Australian Bird Studies Association. So some of the methods that we use are mist netting, cannon netting, other traps or nets. We catch by hand. We can put metal rings on, we put colour bands on, we put engraved leg flags on things like shorebirds, or larger birds like swans will have a larger coloured engraved band, and we can use radio transmitters and satellite tags. And this is a photo on Broughton Island. Greg reaching into a shearwater burrow, trying to capture a shearwater to put a transmitter on it. And because the burrows are so long, you have to reach your whole arm into the burrow and hope that the bird will be there. And the way you catch it is by the bird grabbing a hold of your finger with your beak and pulling it out of the burrow. So mist nets can be set up in a variety of locations. These ones on the left were set up in a field that was taken in Britain over Christmas. So it was quite cold. It was about 6 or 8 degrees that morning. And just on sunrise, they captured a snipe, which was very exciting for them because they hadn't caught snipe at that location before. They use bamboo poles. It's a personal choice as to whether you use bamboo poles. We use metal poles. If you're out at sea, like out off Kiama with Lindsay Smith, and you're catching albatross and seabirds, you use a hand net. The birds are attracted to the boat and they're scooped up in a hand net and then processed. Cannon net, this is a photo of a cannon net set ready to hopefully fire over a catch in Western Australia. This site was particularly rocky along the shoreline, so we had to set the cannons on rocks. But usually they dug into the sand or mud. It's another photo of the cannon net on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, this is quite a small net, very similar to a cannon net, but it's called a whoosh net, and it's operated by pulling a string on an elasticized band, and it flies out over the top of the birds which are on the lawn there. That net's only about 3 metres square, and the capture was of rainbow lorikeets, which are very feisty, and to handle them you need some very strong gloves. This is Alan and Rob and Greg after we've cleared a net lane, getting in preparation for trying to capture the rufous scrubbirds. And a mist net erected on tall poles for capturing birds that are higher up in the canopy. So the aim is to use that. We hope to capture some migrating honey eaters to see if we can find out where they're going when they come through here in that autumn migration. So some of the current projects that we have and their coordinators around the area that we're involved in is Blue Gum Hills Regional Park, which we started in December, and that's Greg is the coordinator for that, December 2014. Sugarloaf State Conservation Area commenced in September 2017. That's run by Rob Kite. Broughton Island commenced in June 2018, and that's the banding side of that's coordinated by Greg, but Alan was heavily involved in setting that up, as he was in the next one being the rufous scrubbird, which commenced in November 2018, also coordinated by Rob. Kooragang Island Cooperative Site, that's a long-standing site that commenced in the early 70s, run by Fred. There was a lot of work done in the early years capturing mainly shorebirds, but also some bush birds. There's been limited work done there over the last 10 or 15 years, but we're hopeful that that can be reactivated in the upcoming season, and we're hoping to commence recatching shorebirds in and around the Hunter and Port Stephens estuaries. Blackbutt Reserve, I don't know when that commenced, but that's coordinated by Joy Nichols. Wedgetail shearwaters and Gould's petrels, again, I'm not sure when that started, but that's the coordinator for that is Nicholas Carlisle, and there's lots of club members that have been involved in banding those birds, particularly the Gould's petrels on Cabbage Tree Island. Munghorn Gap is another cooperative site, and that's been going for at least 40 years. The current coordinator for that is Graham Fry. Seabirds are being caught off Kiama. That was originally Wollongong by Lindsay Smith. And there's a number of other general and targeted projects throughout New South Wales and the rest of Australia that we can be involved in from time to time. The cooperative projects have a coordinator, but any person can band there with permission of the coordinator and provide their records to the coordinator, who submits them then to the ACCCS, who are the body that maintains all the banding records. So banding can take you to lots of places. You can be close to home, in the bush, in the swamp, on the beach or an island, out at sea, in New South Wales, interstate, and even overseas. So this is an albatross off Kiama, and you can just see being processed. So I've got a hold of it. You see the boat bobbing up and down. That bird is very strong, and I've had to grip that wings of that bird quite firmly so that it wouldn't escape before it was processed. We've been fortunate enough to travel to New Zealand and observe some banding there, and also in the UK. And there's lots of other opportunities around the world for banding. This is on 80 Mile Beach at Anna Plains in Broome in Western Australia, where we've had a capture and we're sitting under the shade in quite hot conditions, processing the birds in groups to get them processed as quickly as possible. And there's people come from around the world to participate in that expedition. This year we had 4 or 5 members from Newcastle, so that was quite exciting. In this you can see Broughton Island, and everybody would like to get out there, and sometimes the weather conditions are great, but on the last trip coming back it was quite rough. So it's not for everyone. You need to have patience and manual dexterity for removing birds from the mist nets and applying bands without injury. But if you want to get involved or you're interested in coming along to see what we do, you can contact any of the coordinators and we'll let you know when we're heading out again. So I just wanted to thank many of the A-class banders who've assisted in our training and the training of other upcoming banders, fellow banders who brave the heat and cold on those early morning starts, the support of HBOC, National Parks, LLS, Save Our Species Program, ACCCS and ABSA. And just to finish with some shots of the sunset and a storm over the beaches in Broome. Thank you.